All right, welcome back to the NRG series. I'm Wyatt Darby here with Joe Lissette, and we're here at round 6 of our Pioneer event today, and it's been a pretty good one so far. Joe, what would you say has impressed you the most over the course of the day?
Well, what's surprised me certainly the most is I walked around last round on my round off, and there is not much Lotus Breach in the top dozen or so tables. In fact, I saw one, and maybe I missed a couple other on feature or something, but Lotus Breach is not doing well. And we kind of said beforehand that Lotus Breach, with players that were practiced with it and ready to go, felt like the best deck, unless players really upped their sideboard hate. Maybe that's part of it. Certainly one card that's good against that deck is Kunaros, and that is probably the individual card that's impressed me the most so far. Was when we saw the triple Kunaros sideboard plan out of Esper Control completely go to town against Spirits and dominate the sideboard games. I really enjoyed that, and it was just nicely surprising.
Yeah, it's pretty cool because you almost don't even think, like, I'm going to put this card in my deck for this matchup, but it does seem like it has a flexibility to kind of check a bunch of boxes.
Yeah, and just the lifelink, it's hard to block. The Menace makes it hard to block and dangerous because of removal. And the lifelink really turns around the race, and it's just that card in this, and got some help from other spells, but that creature really played a huge role despite it can't block anything, and yet it mattered a ton. I really got a kick out of it.
Yeah. Grapdago's Cage doing some work, and I think for me it's just been how well Blue-Black Inverter has been doing. It's definitely been the kind of like Terror 1A or B to Lotus Breach, and very similarly, you would expect players to have a lot of tools for it, but it seems to be maybe a little bit more resilient to hate, or at least performing a little bit better on average today. I know that there's a few win-ins of people playing that deck, and it's still kind of scattered quite a bit around the high tables.
Well, I think the hate for Lotus Breach is probably more obvious. Like Damping Sphere, Grafter's Cage. These cards are just good against Lotus Breach. Inverter has more going on. Maybe is more moving parts, even though it's just a sort of a 2-card combo, and so it's not as obvious how one card is going to break it up, aside maybe the extraction effects, but even then it still manages to beat those sometimes with sideboard win conditions.
Yeah, and I do love, it's just kind of the power of being a Thoughtseize deck yourself.
Yeah.
It's kind of classic. We saw it in like Mono Black Devotion back in its standard heyday. It doesn't matter what you board in against me, I can always rip it away from your hands.
Yeah.
And that's one of those things that, even the best flayed plans can be shredded that way, and, part of the reason why I think it's been so resilient and so good. And, beyond that, we actually have seen kind of a smattering of other different decks popping up. Sultai Delirium has kind of really cemented itself as a mid-range deck of choice in the format. Really, we've seen no Niv to light at all, even though the deck was kind of flavorful for a while. And it's kind of interesting because in Sultai, a lot of the cards that aren't Uro kind of seem lackluster to me.
They do, and these Uros, especially when the Uros are on both sides, just bouncing off of each other. And it's just like, okay, someone draws something to break this up, and it's like, it really kind of goes along with how it's hard to break up the Inverter. It's hard to break up the Uro decks, too, because they're just bouncing Uros off each other, and no one, anything would allow you to push, any graveyard hate, any specific thing would allow you to push through, and they just don't have it.
Yep. And speaking of two of these decks, we actually have this round, which presumably is going to be a win-in for top 8. Alex Williams on Sultai Delirium versus Cody Murray on Dimir Inverter. And here we see Alex on the play, leading off with a Thoughtseize. Taking a look at this hand, do you think you go after the Thoughtseize to kind of break up the own hate, or there is the rest of the combo in Cody's hand as well?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you're not worried about getting comboed out this early, although it's turn 4 is the earliest it can go, and with a fetch land and your Thoughtseize, it's unlikely to even happen on turn 5. It really depends. I think if your hand is Wayfinders and Grizzly Salvages, then I think you probably take Inverter. But if you have Jace, maybe if you have Uro that you want to protect, although probably not even in that case, then maybe you take the other Thoughtseize.
Yeah, I do think it makes sense to take the Inverter because there's a lot of cards in Sultai that do pretty similar things to each other, and to some extent, it can utilize cards put in its own graveyard. So I think that's a heady choice. To me, Alex is just making a statement that I'm okay if this game goes a little bit longer. I'm okay playing 8 turns as opposed to 5 or 6.
Yeah, and I mean the Inverter itself is the most important card in the deck, I think, by far. So taking that is, it's hard to argue with that.
Yeah, and here we see just a quick Fable Passage and pass from Alex, missing the opportunity to play, a Wayfinder or a Salvage here. And here we have Cody cracking a fetch land. Not, it's kind of difficult to say if it's worth holding on to that for the thought or the Fatal Push in hand. But here we see the Thoughtseize getting fired off. A couple lands for Alex, as well as Courser of Krufix, Traverse the Uvenwald, and Ishkana. Honestly, not that many cards that the Inverter deck is hugely interested in.
No, I suppose you take if you take the Courser, then we're going to turn on Delirium right away, which is not ideal. So do you take Traverse then based on that? I think you might.
Yeah, it's the value that Corsair provides is pretty thin. It's going to
Yeah.
make it a little bit harder for Alex to flood out. But yeah, the body is a bit slow. I think Traverse is probably the pick here. Ishkana I think is much too slow to really matter.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean the Corsair might be kind of appealing on face value to disrupt the curve, but I think the cost of that's actually a bit too high.
Yeah. I think you take Traverse here. It's just the annoyance of the Courser being two creature types, two card types, really matters here.
Yeah,
And yep, okay, take Traverse.
Yeah, definitely one of the more kind of medium power level cards in the deck, but it does have kind of, just the right types.
Mhm.
And I think that's what pushes it to be, kind of the consistent 2-of that we see. And yeah, Corsair does come down, no surprise, flipping Murderous Rider, which, interaction against this Dimir Inverter deck, not particularly good, but having a way to clear a Jace Wielder of Mysteries, I think is pretty important.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So let's see how I'm looking over Cody's deck list here. It looks pretty stock post the win condition swap when players went from 4 Oracles to 4 Jace. Other than that, we do have almost the full set of discard in the main deck. Okay, so we basically have the Peppa Pig list, except we've added a second Hero's Downfall in place of a 4th Thought Erasure.
I think that's reasonable, kind of, hedging your bets against decks that can attack you a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
And Hero's Downfall is certainly flexible enough that as long as you can spend the 3 mana to cast it, it should be perfectly fine. And yeah, Cody was kind of feeling like he needed to, he's looking for something in particular. I do think a Jace is, besides the Murderous Rider, pretty appealing. And he does cast Thassa's Oracle, kind of giving up some combo potential. He already lost his Inverter. And now he's just trying to find some, I think, high-impact card advantage.
Yeah, it does block the Courser all day long, although, again, the life total is not likely to matter too much. Oracle, kind of a weird... We played several days of practicing Pioneer before realizing that Thassa's Oracle doesn't actually have to take a card and put it on top. It seems completely obvious when you read the card what it says, but still we read it wrong. And I imagine we're not the only ones because I heard other people talking about the same thing. But you do have the choice when you're scrying. It is actually like scrying instead of what on... In my case, first reading, it looks like you have to take a card and put it on top.
Yeah, and actually pretty interesting play by Alex here this turn. Had the option to cast Nissa, who shakes the world, but instead goes with a non-delirious Ishkana. And do you think that's mostly kind of a shout-out to kind of showing sense or some respect?
I mean, that would make sense. Certainly, Nissa would be much more desirable to have on the board at this point. Also, if you ran out the Nissa first and it got countered, then your Ishkana would be powered up and bring tokens with it.
And here we see Cody with the discard spell actually kind of completing the punishment for holding the Nissa in hand. And I think that does make sense. There's a lot of discard in the deck. It's kind of, cards are definitely not safe in hands.
Actually, I take that back. Because the Courser is in play, it wouldn't, even with the Planeswalker, or the creature being countered, with the Planeswalker being countered, the Ishkana would not have brought tokens. Also, no, against the heaps of discard, it's not, like, there's no way for Alex to know if this is, a 5 discard spell or an 8 discard spell build of Inverter, because definitely there is that range. So you may not think it was likely you get hit with another discard spell already.
Yeah, I guess it is fair to give up a little bit of, giving up some value on losing that Nissa. In some ways, it is okay. You can kind of recoup that with a tireless tracker that you're getting. So, Alex does kind of have a diversity of threats that allows him to lose the Nissa and continue to battle on in the game. And it looks like the tracker's going to be a pretty clean play this turn. He has a land to produce a clue with it, and Uro on top, and just about enough stuff in the graveyard to escape it is, Alex is starting to kind of pile on the pressure.
Yeah, definitely. And this is a matchup in a deck list where Nissa is really just kind of a go-wide threat. We're not using our massive amounts of mana for anything, are we?
Beyond, 2 spelling, Walking Ballista, Emrakul, it's kind of, a lot of these cards are kind of one-ofs, Yeah, it's definitely, it strikes me more as a situation where, Nissa is a concession to Delirium and how we need these extra card types.
All right, so now we have Anti-Delirium as Cody delves away his entire graveyard, which sets him up nicely to potentially win if he's able to piece together the combo pieces next turn. And there's one of them.
Yeah, it's wild how fast this deck Inverter, I mean, can go from nothing to comboed.
Mm-hmm.
You know, an Oracle, Inverter, and 6 land is just a KO. And, you know, Alex is not completely tapped out. He does still have 3 mana up to represent some things, but, you know, if you're Cody, you kind of know everything that's in his hand because that course has been in play all game.
Yeah, a little bit of sloppy mechanics there on Cody's part. Dealt himself 6 cards instead of 7, and then it really almost basically added one to his hand before taking it back and realizing he was 1 short in the dig pile. But we got it straightened out now. There was a Jace, so both of the blue win condition, the blue half of the win condition needed in both aspects. I did not see an Inverter. So
Yeah, it's pretty tough. You know, Cody is aware of Murder Strider, you know, the last card hanging out in Alex's hand. But the beauty of Inverter is that you actually don't really care about those so much if you're playing with Thassa's Oracle. You just have to wait a turn and cast it onto while your library is empty, and it doesn't matter if your thing dies. And yeah, it looks like Inverter was a take there. So
yeah, okay.
Cody's going to be setting that 2-turn sequence up. And, you know, the one thing that some of these Delirium decks have to fight it is they're playing Ipnu Rivulet, which you can use to mill your opponent and kind of surprise deck them. Alex does have a copy of that, but currently no way to search. It's just going to have to be in his top, I think, like next 2 cards here.
Right. Do we have, let's see. We have Sorcery, Land, Planeswalker in the graveyard, yeah. So that's not, well, that's another row. That does not help.
Yeah, I actually think...
oh, that's the same one, okay.
With the creature being added, I think that might actually be enough to cast a Traverse if it could be found.
Land, Sorcery, Planeswalker, creature. Yeah, you're right. You're right. So Traverse would win the game here. I don't think we have it.
If you're Alex, you have access to Uro, which is a 3-mana redraw. So if you draw the Rivulet, you would have mana left over to make that work.
Yeah.
But you know you're drawing Emrakul.
Yeah, you know you're drawing Emrakul, so that doesn't function. So we're just going to, I mean, hold up Murderous Rider and hope it's Jace. But unfortunately, it is not.
Yeah, a bit of a rough break from Alex. Definitely a fine gambit to take, you know, trying to beat a Jace here. The other option was cast Uro and hope the Rivulet is just naturally the next card after your Uro draw. So he decided his odds were better to kind of play around the Planeswalker that might be there and kind of punished by Cody as he takes that game 1.
Did we have 6 mana? We might have. We maybe could have done both.
That's true. Yeah, you can cast the Uro and at least take the look at the top card. Yeah. So that was a pretty close game. I really did kind of showcase a few things, you know, that Dig Through Time, pretty exceptional. You know, double Demonic Tutor duty as always there. And that Thoughtseize can give Sultai a lot of time to operate. You know, I think the big problem in that game for Alex was just kind of the lack of pressure to go with those discard spells.
Yeah, and even, I mean, there was just nothing going on. I mean, when a Thassa's Oracle can block most of your creatures, yeah, you're not putting any pressure on at all. It was really all there was the Nissa, and it never made it into play, and that was it. You give these combo decks. It's arguable that the combo deck in this situation is a higher power deck in the first place, and then if you're not putting pressure on it, allowing them to just build up the graveyard and cast Dig Through Time, when there's no hate cards in the main deck, it's just asking to have that's exactly what we watched is what the fear is, and that's just what happened.
Yeah, and I do think, though, that it's more likely that Sultai can get a little bit more out of the sideboard. So let's take a look at what Alex has to work with. Looks like 3 copies of both Mystical Dispute and Leyline of the Void, 2 Damping Sphere, and a slew of one-ofs. Disdainful Stroke, Reclamation Sage, Kalitas, Brain Maggot, Sultai Charm, Noxious Grasp, and Tyrant Score. And so, you know, I do see a little bit of counter magic. Leyline of the Void is a card that people will turn to sometimes to kind of guarantee that the game goes at least, you know, closer to 6 turns. But I guess it's not quite a high density of haymakers that I might like. You know, besides the counter spells, Disdainful Stroke being reasonable, Brain Maggot being nice disruption, I guess Alex has a little bit less than ideal here.
Yeah, I wouldn't even say there's really any haymakers here. There are nice playable cards that will help, but none of these cards are just going to win the game. And really, that's, I guess, one of the strengths of the Inverter deck is there aren't obvious cards that are just going to beat it. So on Cody's side, we have 2 Damping Spheres, 1 Languish, 2 Legion's End, 1 Negate, 2 Mystical Disputes, 1 Kalitas also, 2 Doomblades, 1 Narset, and 3 Pack Rats. So we're looking for diversity of win conditions and kind of ways to slow down Alex, but I don't think we need to slow down Alex.
Yeah, it seems like Narset's a pretty reasonable one, especially its positive interaction against Uro is
Sure.
pretty appealing.
Yeah.
It's also a card that helps you grind. Now, my inclination is that a card like Pack Rat seems a little bit untenable when you're on the draw. Do you think that's a bit too slow to get rolling when Cody's playing second here?
I mean, I wouldn't put it quite that way. I mean, that's a reasonable stance for it. I would say that it's more of if Alex boards down removal, then the Pack Rat's going to be good regardless because Alex's deck is slow enough. And if Alex doesn't board down on removal, then the Pack Rat's just going to look silly. I'm excited about the Kalidas. I think Kalidas against Uro just naturally is going to do well every time. So I would like to see that come in. And I guess you would bring in what? Yeah, maybe your Pack Rat. Like you said, Narset. I mean, I don't know how many cards we're taking out. It's probably not a large number. So but I don't think we're doing much work here.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. It kind of makes sense that with these decks being like two of the most popular in their format, in a lot of ways they're going to have themselves pre-boarded in some spots, and I think that makes sense. Where we see kind of mild sideboard numbers as opposed to some of the breach sideboards we've seen, which might have contained closer to maybe like 8 cards for that.
Yeah, and that's what we see in these decks also. Is if playing against breach, they're pretty loaded up. I mean, Alex has, just the first 3 entries there, Disputes, Leylines, Damping Spheres, all very strong cards. And then plus throw in a few more, I could easily get to 10 or 11 cards coming in. Which, Breach is, certainly one of the top 2 scariest decks in the format, if not the top 1. So it makes sense that you'd kind of overload that direction. And also it's, again, like we said earlier, it's the easiest deck to probably sideboard against out of the top tier. So these players, I think these games are going to last a while. I don't think anyone's getting blown out maybe this Sultai Delirium gets blown out early, but really these sideboard games could easily last 10 turns. I wouldn't be at all surprised to see that.
Yeah, one thing interesting about Alex's build in particular is we've seen some Sultai lists kind of err towards the side of getting closer to 6 or 8 discard spells, like cutting Grizzly Salvages for Thought Erasure, and Alex is not doing that. Kind of opting for maximizing Uro kind of at the cost of opposing interaction. And I think we'll sort of see the punishment for that in, it's going to be better against aggro when you can always make your turn for a Titan. And, that matters a lot less if you can just kind of die after you cast it. And we do have a little bit of time as some players are taking a mulligan or two. So why don't we talk about one of our championship trial weekends upcoming in Milwaukee on March 21st and 22nd. We have 2 5Ks. The first one is going to be a team tournament where you can play Pioneer, Modern, and Legacy with 2 of your friends. And on Sunday, we're going to have more Pioneer. So I think these formats are, for the most part, all in a great spot. And really excited going up to Milwaukee, kind of towards the back end of the first season. So really important opportunity to pick up some points. And after that, we're going to have our $15,000 weekend, our showdown weekend in Naperville, where Saturday it's a 10K event where the winner gets an invitation to the Players Tour, our end of the year championship, and a whole load of cash. And looks like we're ready and good to go for game 2. And here we see Alex starting off with Leyline. So he actually decided that card was worth the slot here.
Yeah, and I think that's defendable. I don't think it's clear cut obvious that this is the right choice, but I think plenty of people would argue in its favor. And obviously, if you're going to have it, ideally you want it on. You don't want to be one of those people that just automatically plays the line and says go, and then looks at their hand and like blinks and is like, oh my gosh, what did I just do? But we did get it down there.
Yeah, and I think personally I'm more likely to be the type of person who has Leyline as my first draw for the game.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, well, that's what we want to avoid doing. Although, yeah, against Inverter, that's pretty bad. Against Breach, casting Leyline turn 4 is probably fine. But against Inverter, that's not going to really work for you.
Yeah, and, it does a few things in this matchup. It does delay the combo. It makes you can't cast an Inverter of Truth until you can end the game immediately. And also, it does a lot of work to slow down dig through time. And if you're planning to play a slower game, I think the effects of an opponent resolving dig can be pretty close to game ending by themselves. And they kind of saw that in game 1.
All right, so there is. Pack Rat did come in and does not get selected. So Alex Williams presumably does have it covered with removal. We can hope. Yeah,
it's kind of tough to be happy about casting your Pack Rat when your opponent saw that you had it with Brain Maggot and decided to leave it. But, it's one of those things where if you don't have anything better to do, I think the only other castable cards for Cody are Opt and Doomblade. Might decide that cantripping is a little bit better. Yeah. And, if nothing else, I think it's valid to wait till maybe turn 5 and play a Pack Rat while you can make one too.
Sure. Alex comes in for 1, and again, just there's no pressure being dealt, no damage being dealt at all, really, to Cody. So there's the opt. Will be exiled, so we can't build up for dig-through time with the current state of things. And we probably don't have, I imagine we're not too good at getting Ley Line of the Void off the board.
No, I think you probably have to play like a blink of an eye type effect to make that happen, and I don't think Cody has anything in that regard.
Let me recheck this. I actually think that that Ley Line of the Void cannot leave the board. Yeah, I think it's there to stay.
Yeah, it's looking solid. One downside from Alex is he did take a mulligan this game, so combined with the ley line, he's operating off a pretty low base of kind of functional resources, and Cody is a turn away from queuing up Jace Wielder Mysteries and kind of doing a lot to bury Alex in card advantage. So this is a pretty important Grizzly salvage. He might opt for the Courser, but if he doesn't take that Murder Strider, he might have a hard time actually answering the Jace.
Well, there we go. Courser is selected. So. And again, do we know about the Jace also? Do we not? Or was that in the opening hand? I don't remember. When the discard spell was cast.
Yeah, I think it has been added since then.
Sure.
A couple ops did a lot of work to kind of sculpt the hand for Cody, and that's pretty brutal. Working with incomplete information, it's very easy to kind of pick the wrong thing to fight against. And in a lot of situations, Courser is going to be solid. And, Alex is at risk of missing his land drop here. So after we see an attack, I suspect Courser's going to kind of finish the turn here unless there's a land on top.
I'm not sure we even have double green. I can't. What's the land under the forest? Is that a Blooming Marsh? Yeah, I think it is. So he does have double green. All right, so there's the Uro. Hit the land drop. Okay, that turn was fine. We have 4 in the graveyard.
Yeah, the only thing Alex needs to have come together, just a second blue source, and then Uro is threatening to come back. But here it is. Cody can kind of make the play that I think he's got to be pretty happy to make. Jace on what's almost an empty board here.
Mm-hmm. So I guess, are we exiling ourselves? I think we probably are. I don't think we're in a hurry to put a couple more cards into Alex's graveyard.
Yeah, it's the Uro is kind of already there, so there's not a ton of extra damage you can do. But sometimes you have to be afraid of your opponents kind of ripping your inverter, and I found kind of getting a head start towards your Jace alternate win condition is a reasonable line to take. And here we do see Jace for 1 in triple blue. You have a 4 loyalty planeswalker that says if you would draw a card while your library has no cards in it, you win the game instead. It's +1, mills a player for 2 cards, and has you drawing a card. And for 8 loyalty, you can draw 7. And if Jace leaves the battlefield off that exchange and you empty your deck, you do still win. And pretty clutch second Murder Strider actually taking down that Jace almost immediately. We saw Alex kind of skip over the first one on Grizzly Salvage, but it might have been because he had a second one in hand the whole time.
Did you say I didn't know that. If you ultimate the Jace and deck yourself off of it, I guess because the static ability would win the game?
Yeah, that's why they added that line to the ultimate.
Okay.
It looks a little bit funky. I remember people kind of questioned it on Twitter when the card was released. But yeah, just to make sure you kind of maintain that Jace functionality, I think is why they had that.
Okay, so here we have the Jace is gone. Pack Rat can make a copy of itself, like you said, waiting for 5 mana. And then, so this replaces itself. So, we don't even need a token. We'll just use the Pack Rat that's already there. I doubt that's going to fly with the Judge, but
yeah, not a great way to represent extra copies of Pack Rat. Probably. Yeah, so we'll make sure to get a way to represent the imposter rat, or the second one that we have. And now Alex is going to be needing to see if he has a way to kill this extra rat, because I mean, this isn't enough. This is kind of very similar to the situation that he would have been in otherwise. You kind of have to get rid of all of them, or you haven't really done the job.
Yeah. Was the Legion's End is in Cody's sideboard? Are there copies in Alex's sideboard also?
Nope. Yeah, no copies of Legion's
Okay.
End, so that means kind of no clean 1-for-1 way. And it looks like Alex is trying to take a different angle to beat the Pack Rat. I think that's just kind of use Uro to outmuscle it here.
Offers up the trade, which Cody is going to decline. And a lot of cards in Cody's hand. So this pack rat, I mean, if we have another land here, the rats are going to start growing fairly quickly.
Yeah, some actually pretty interesting options from Cody's perspective. He does have the combo in his hand, but because it's Jace and Inverter, that takes 8 mana to execute, and the Inverter is going to be kind of just uncastable in the meantime. So, yeah, I would not be surprised at all if we saw some combination of Hero's Downfall, discard Inverter, or even maybe double rat. I guess we can actually get a discount rat.
Yeah, double rat. Wow, without the land, sure. It's going to be tough though. I mean, while these rats are going to grow reasonably quickly, Uro's much bigger and will be for quite some time. And I don't think we're in order to be able to double block but only trade 1, we're going to need 5 tokens, not 4. So, no, that's not right. I guess if you have 4 tokens, you double block with 2, 4. Yeah, you just trade 1 for 1, so that would be fine.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit more tenable for Cody to cast Hero's Downfall on Uro. Alex isn't really showing a great way to reload the graveyard after that, and that could be what he needs to keep the 6/6 off the table for, not forever, but probably for like 3 or 4 turns.
Because aside from the Uro, the rats are easily going to overpower anything Alex has going right now.
Yeah, and there we do see the Hero's Downfall. I think that's a smart move from Cody, kind of identifying the only card that is really of consequence from your opponent right now. And it almost, that's the beauty of Pack Rat. In a certain situation, it just removes the variance from the game. Whatever you draw is going to function the same way. You just get extra rats out of everything. And yeah, here we do see Sultai Charm on top of Alex's library. One of those modal charms from Khans. It does 3 things. It can destroy a monocolor creature, which can take down a Pack Rat. It also destroys an artifact or enchantment, or draw 2 and discard a card. So that could be another useful angle to feed the graveyard for this Uro.
So Cody throws down another Jace. Unclear to me if he has another land in hand or not. I know he has another Hero's Downfall he drew this turn. He does not have a land, so the plan here is probably to just chump block or trade off in order to protect the Jace and then slam Inverter next turn to end the game. We'll see if that works out. It is vulnerable to a few things, like another Swift End.
Yeah, and seeing the Mystical Dispute on top kind of forces Cody to go digging for land number 7. Otherwise, that isn't really going to work out the way he wants it to. And I think it's reasonable to pivot into the combo kill here, but it's tough because the kind of board control angle was looking pretty successful too.
Yeah.
And if you split the difference, the Pack Rats do kind of close to nothing. So it's definitely not necessarily wrong, but it's a bold choice to kind of change course and away from the Pack Rat train.
So we're at the point now where Alex may not be able to actually attack. He does have. Do we have the Sultai Charm in hand right now?
That actually got milled over.
Got
with
milled.
the Jace
Yeah,
Plus.
okay, yeah.
Which in itself was pretty interesting. Cody is opening the door for Uro to be a little bit easier to return with that play. He is just kind of that afraid of the charm.
All right, so the match possibly could end this turn.
Yeah, excellent top deck from Cody. Thought Erasure gets to strip the discard spell, and I think that can actually just be game by itself.
Dispute. No, it goes down, and then Inverter and activate Jace.
Yeah, and here we see kind of the downside of Leyline of the Void. There's no graveyard for Cody to put back on top, and with the Jace Plus, he takes a match.
Yeah, pretty clean. Again, another match for Inverter. Yeah, this deck is doing very well today.
Yeah, and that should take Cody into a great position to double draw into the top 8. And Alex isn't dead either. He does still, he drops to 5-1, still an excellent day, and a round or 2 to kind of rebound and still see himself into the top 8. And yeah, I think that was just a really excellent testament to all the strengths of Inverter. It got its graveyard tagged, and it still played a great fair game.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so we do have another. Let's see if we can bring up what our other match is on the. Okay, that's just fine. So our backup match this round, we have Mark Johnson playing Boros Feather. I certainly have not seen this in a little while. And what do you have over there?
And that's against Nick Roller, who we saw last round as well, playing Bant Spirits.
Okay, Bant Spirits against Boros Feather with Reckless Rage. Ooh, Reckless Rage seems quite good.
Yeah, that's just the kind of the ideal machine gun, I think, especially against a tribal deck like Spirit. So it looks like we're ready to go into the action. So why don't we go down to game 1 of our backup feature match this round.
Magic players Joshua Collier and Ben Miney, your side bet is ready to begin. Please come up to the registration stage. Again, Joshua
Favorite Hoplite, a card that certainly had a lot of success in my hands. How's it going, little buddy? All right, what do we have to start his journey into being a terrifying 8/9? Let's go. What do we have in here? So we have Reckless Rage, which is excellent in all situations. Titan Strength, it's a pretty nice pump spell. Defiant Strike, God's Willing, Gird for Battle. That is our suite of pump spells, it looks like.
Yeah, and we have a pretty strong kind of beatdown start from Mark. A double creature and Defiant Strike cycled on favorite Hoplite worth multiple power. And, you know, Nick's got a reasonable start as well, 2-drop into Lord. And I think it's really going to hinge a lot on if Mark can find those removal spells to kind of break up these creature synergies, because I don't think Nick can really risk getting into blocking with this stuff.
Mm-hmm. And here, is that Dreadhorde Arcanist? Yeah. So Dreadhorde Arcanist is a card that didn't exist when Heroic was played in Standard last time around. Is going to do a lot of work even without pumping itself, and they definitely can pump in this deck, but just a straight up attack right here. Arcanist, a 1/3 trampler. Whenever it attacks, you may flashback a spell from the graveyard, an instant or sorcery, without paying the mana cost that is less than or equal to his own power. So currently, the Defiant Strike is free to cast if Arcanist comes in. There it goes.
I think the stack of Selfless Spirits is actually kind of interesting. It is one of the ways for Nick to kind of assemble a bit of a makeshift fog in this matchup, and he might be actually, you know, kind of reduced to that pretty quickly. You know, there's a large attack coming in from Mark, and, you know, the Feather players is currently a little bit behind on life total, but 2 mana up and a handful of cards represents a lot of possible Titan strength, and yeah, actually here we see one.
Whoa, so we're seeing this. This is most likely after a no-block declaration. And we're done.
Yeah, that was 2 pump spells, I think, for exactly lethal. You know, that Titan Strength was worth 5 points of damage between the Prowess and the Hoplite trigger.
Yeah.
And, yeah, that was a really quick game 1. And we're going to talk about sideboards because I feel like these games can be pretty darn fast here. So
yeah, certainly. I'm certain that I'm sorry, I missed the name of our Spirits player.
Oh, Nick Roller.
Nick would agree with you that these games might go fast. So well, you're on top. Go
why don't we start with Nick's sideboard here? Kind of a fair smattering of cards. We have 1 of Archangel Avacyn, Deputy of Detention, and Disdainful Stroke. 2 copies of Dovin's Veto, Rest in Peace, Settle the Wreckage, and Shadow Spear, rounded out by 4 Mystical Disputes. So I think it's going to be kind of the regular cards you expect against aggro. It seems like Deputy of Detention is reasonable. Settle the Wreckage, you know, the only way Boros Feather properly wins the games with attacking, so I think it seems fine in these racing games. And, you know, I could even see an argument for Shadow Spear to kind of help in games that played out like game 1.
Mm-hmm. For the Mark Johnson side with Boros Feather, we have 2 Apostle of Purifying Light, 1 Chandra Acolyte of Flame, 1 Hazaret the Fervent, 2 Karizev's Expertise, 2 Rest in Peace, 2 Swift Justice, 3 Wear and Tear, and 2 Wild Slash. So our removal here doesn't really line up spectacularly well. Wild Slash kills the smaller creatures. Swift Justice is the card that makes a creature fight itself, if I'm remembering that right.
I think it might be First Strike and Lifelink,
maybe
for 1 white mana.
I'm just remembering the wrong
It's a
card.
bit of a unique pump spell. I think it's an old Return to Ravnica one.
Okay, I was thinking of the red-white. I was thinking of Justice Strike. Okay, so Swift Justice is a card I'm unfamiliar with. So we'll bring that up in a second and decide whether it would come in. There it is. Until end of turn, target creature gets +1/+0 and gains First Strike and Lifelink. Okay. That seems entirely playable here.
Yeah, it kind of seems like it's just, you know, meant for these sort of creature mirrors.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's if Nick ever tries to rely on blocking to swing the game, it just seems like an impossible proposition against the, you know, about 12 different pump spells that all kind of blow him out.
Yeah, definitely that seems just fine. Wild Slash, I mean, it does pick off Selfless Spirits, which is nice. Some of the rest of these cards, the Karizev's Expertise, that's not going to do us any good. Rest in Peace is not going to do us any good. So, yeah, I think we might just see these cheap removal spells. Wear and Tear is not going to help. I think we're just going to play the cheap removal spells and the pump spells, and that's it probably.
Yeah, kind of nice light and tight sideboarding from both players. And why don't we hop down to the second game here of this match where we're going to have our Spirits player, Nick, on the play. See if, I think a Mausoleum Wanderer start is sort of exactly what you want if you're opting in for the race. It's far and away the most powerful one-drop. Spectral Sailor, not even close to capable of matching that power.
And a favorite hoplite on Mark's side, which is his best one-drop. Swift Spirit being the other one. And Swift Spirit's fine, but hoplite, especially in the matchup where
It's just, yes, not going away from prowess is a huge deal. And here we see a bit of an awkward one-land keep from Mark, just a Swift Spear, not even on defense, just Swift Spear go. And we see Nick continuing to make land drops and might even have a 2-Spirit turn, which would be a really excellent way to punish this this misstep from Mark.
Yeah, so if we're keeping with one land, we're going to have, I would imagine we have to have multiple one-mana spell. There's a second land there. So maybe we have a Reckless Rage. We're going to have something that allows us to catch up, although it's not going to work against multiple Mausoleum Wanderers.
Yeah, kind of interesting that there wasn't like a Defiant Strike in a one-land hand. I feel like that's kind of a card that frequently pushes me to do that. But instead we actually see it's Swift Justice. So Mark kind of going in, just getting in some life link while he knows the coast is clear. There's no possibility of a Spell Queller here. And Nick is just kind of thinking about it. Like, is this worth... Do you think this is worth a Mausoleum Wanderer after he flashes into Rattle Chains?
Well, Nick doesn't think so. He wouldn't need even a... Yeah, there's the Rattle Chains. But does not... Well, let's see. Do we have Mark dead on the board would be a question.
I think it's hard to get there after the... if you counter the
life link. Yeah, we would need multiple spirit. We need 3 spirits. There's no way we're getting that done this turn. Nick is at 8. That's not a lot.
Yeah, it's actually even more impressive after Mark just kind of skipped the second land and kind of attacking with the second creature that first time.
So, yeah, Nick's not even comfortable enough to send all the creatures here, which he shouldn't be, but that's not a good sign when your opponent missed a land drop and you're afraid of getting just attacked, ground into the dirt by little one-drops.
Yeah, and from Nick's side, it's not like he has any kind of relief in hand. He's sitting on a handful of lands, so he doesn't really have any. He's just kind of relying on the respect that Mark can give his open mana when he makes these blocks, because I think most anything getting played can kind of just make this into a disaster.
Well, we shall see. I mean, currently, if we pass, the only thing dying is the Rattle Chains. 1, 2, 3, 4. Although that would leave Mark in a reasonable amount of danger. Oh, I didn't realize they were going to... Oh, because the Lord's in place, so they do trade. Okay.
Yeah, I think you're pretty ecstatic to kind of have combat pass through like that, especially because Favorite Hoplite, I mean, it's never going to get worse, right? And
no.
Kind of an interesting trade to offer if you're on Mark's side and not really interested in kind of casting anything in that turn. Oh, but this explains why he was willing to wait. Boros Charm on the end step actually meets the Spell Queller that he might have suspected was there the whole time, but actually was just drawn this turn. And, by waiting, he did kind of give himself the opportunity to gain more information, but did potentially miss a couple critical points of prowess damage that would have otherwise gone on through.
So Nick at 7. What do we have? There's the Reckless Rage. That's going to get countered. Okay. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It looks like any spirit win the game here. Or not. 1, 2. Oh, I'm sorry. The Spell Queller is 3 power, so yeah. Actually, Nick just had it rolled up.
Yeah, just nice exact lethal even after countering the Reckless Rage that we see, which, when combined with Feather, is one of the big engines that kind of propelled this Boros deck to a lot of its standard power. And, it's not quite as good in Pioneer in a lot of ways. The format is a bit faster. The combo decks can ignore it, but I still think it's a pretty important kind of point of strength, just giving yourself the ability to kind of just have this combo that trumps all the creature mirrors. And, the problem we saw these last 2 games is this Feather deck, it is pretty mana light, and even just casting Feather is not trivial,
No, and especially with, missing land drops, and then the Mausoleum Wanderers are just like hard counters sitting on the board. And that's got to be frustrating since you have the cards in your hand to potentially win the game, but you know they're not going to function.
Yeah, it looks like, why don't we go to game 3? I don't think players would have changed too much from their sideboarding based on player draw here. And again, Mark on the play for this decider. And actually, again, with the best one drop on the deck, the favorite hoplite coming down, and no Mausoleum Wanderer from this time. So we'll see how that impacts Nick's ability to counter race.
No Mausoleum Wanderer, but do we have a second land this time? We do. There it is. And another favorite hoplite. So this is going to get going very quickly. Gird for battle would be nuts right now.
Yeah, it's definitely not, to be. You gotta respect the 1 mana for 4 permanent power on board that Grid represents with these hoplites.
Nick, respecting Mark's ability to pump creatures, does not choose to block with the Phantom. Okay, Deputy there is excellent.
Yeah, pretty strong blowout, kind of catching Mark without any open mana, and Mark has a God's Willing in hand, but favored tapping out, advancing his board with the Dreadheart Arcanist, and we'll see he actually is able to unlock those hoplites again. So that was a mild inconvenience, kind of reset the counters, but this, double Reckless Rage turn here is just
so
absolute
good.
brutality.
It's so good. Wow, Arcanist allowing the free cast on the Rage and puts a counter on the hoplite. And Nick was looking, that was a pretty good-looking start for Nick, and yet now he has no board, and he's facing down 3 creatures.
God, did he even put a counter on a hoplite?
Yeah.
It's just.
So I think Nick has both Selfless Spirit and Rattle Chains in his hand and chooses to leave up Rattle Chains, which seems okay. At this point, there's not going to likely be any good blocks here.
Yeah, especially with Defiant Strike cycling through, just growing this hoplite for free. I believe preventing combat damage to it here, right? So removing another opportunity for Nick to get a good block. And again, he has to tap out for this creature, and then he's going to be playing into the open mana and the open hands of Mark. If there's any counterplay from our Feather player.
The best we could do here, given nothing from Mark's side, is play out the Rattle Chains, double block and kill the Dreadheart Arcanist. Even that's, we're going to eat 6 damage, I think. And just a shock picks it off.
Yeah, shot killing Rattle Chains for such an efficient rate still leaves Mark with the ability to have some pump spells, or even just a pump spell and the God's Willing that he's been clutching all game. And yeah, it looks like Swift Justice to continue to load up on this hoplite. It looks like it's going to be a hit for, I think, is that 7 damage from the 2 unblocked creatures, and that's going to put Nick in a spot where
and pads his life total. Yeah, he has no worries here.
And, it does make sense to me that Boros Feather would be advantage in this matchup.
Yeah.
Some of the biggest problems Spirits has is with aggro decks that play creatures that are hard to spell queller and loads of removal. And, we've kind of seen Mark be able to put that recipe together exactly perfectly this game.
This Arcanist has done so much work. I think this is the 3rd spell it's cast. Which is, you take it. Whoa.
Oh, settle the wreckage now. That's pretty good against God's Willing.
Yeah. You. Oh boy. Well, that is dramatically going to affect the outcome of this game. We'll see if Nick's able to recover here, but boy, he's basically have to start over now.
Yeah, and if you're not familiar, Settle the Wreckage, 2 white for an instant that says exile all attacking creatures target player controls, and that player, it's fair, they can get a basic land tapped for each creature that was exiled. And now, from Mark's perspective, thankfully he has another creature in the tank, and it's one of the most powerful ones in his deck. Feather plays incredibly with that extra mana he was just given.
Great follow-up after getting your board torched. Feather, which is a wrecking crew all by itself, as long as we have the spells to get it going.
Yeah, there's not many copies of cards like Deputy Detention in Nick's deck. He already spent 1, and that means there's a pretty good chance there's no way to deal with Feather, especially if he can be given protection from all relevant colors.
And this is an upkeep, God's Willing, to give some control over the draw step for the turn. 2 of them after Nebelgust Herald attempts to tap the Feather. And why not? Because you're going to get them back. They're effectively free as long as they resolve.
Yeah, extra scries seem fantastic, and Mark keeping a card on top almost seems like it has to spell Doom for Nick. Although, there's you would just take any pump spell here, right?
Yes. I think I would.
Or-
I mean, I would nearly take any non-land. Is that another shock? Yeah. Okay. Get the two God's Willings back in hand during the end step. And Nick's at 3, knowing he's facing down double God's Willing. We might not even need the top card of the deck, whatever it is.
Yeah, Spellcaller from Nick can stop the second God's Willing that would make it actual lethal. But that's just a kind of a Band-Aid on this situation more than anything.
All right, Spellcaller goes after the first one. What do we have? We know there's another God's Willing, so Mark can effectively choose which either the Selfless Spirit or the Phantom will die this turn.
Yeah, Nick has a little bit of counterplay in terms of the Selfless Spirit can allow him to make that choice
that's true.
into the 3-2, but still, he's going to be forced to Abyss a creature, and Mark is still going to have the one protective spell up, and with the one God's Willing, it means that he can't allow the Spellcaller to block, which would currently be bouncing, and seems like Nick's best hope, but as long as that option's removed, it seems kind of tough. I think he has another Spellcaller in hand, though. So if he can tag the second God's Willing on this turn, that could actually break up this sort of lock.
Wow. And there it is. So now Mark's still drawing off the deck with 40 live draws, give or take, but doesn't hit one. And Nick actually might be able to turn this around.
Yeah, essentially kind of a ticking time bomb. I think Nick's done excellent work to bring this game close to parity.
Yeah.
Really a swingy one, from the 3 creatures to the Settle to the Feather and then back to this. Any removal spell from Mark ends the game on the spot, but if he just draws his creatures, or lands, then he can't actually find a way forward here.
Nothing doing from Bark. Wow. So what are we looking for here from Mark's side? We need Shock's not going to do any good. We really need any pump spell. Reckless Rage is great.
And what do you think about this double Spellcaller attack? That kind of leaves Nick a little bit vulnerable on the back end. That almost has to mean there's a card like Collected Company or Nebelgaster out in his hand, right?
So let's see. What do we have? I don't know that artwork.
Oh, Ryle. That's 1 red, deal a damage to your own creature, draw a card. Okay. So it's a cantrip. It doesn't really advance Mark's board in any way, but it is a value engine that he can start to build here. And I think he found a Reckless Rage, which can kind of have this Spellcaller House of Cards fall down very quickly.
Chain reaction, except what do we have? We have Rattle Chains.
And I think that even the Reckless Rage does still have one legal target, so
it should still resolve, and so Mark will still get it back in his hand during the end step, so he can actually cast it again before Nick untaps, I believe, which should allow him to go a long way towards stabilizing this mess.
I think you might now. The Reckless Rage still deals damage to Feather, right? So he probably have to wait until I guess next turn's upkeep to make sure it doesn't actually kill his bird.
Yeah.
But this is actually Nick is just about there from pulling this one away, and don't know if there's any other relevant cards in hand for Mark. I know I see a Sacred Foundry that is most definitely dead at this point, but he can't even really attack now because then Feather would just trade for the Rattle Chains, and he's kind of forced to stay in place for this one more turn.
So the misplay that I was talking about, almost happened.
Just barely caught himself there. It's impressive for Mark. It's easy to get lost in the rest of the turn in a spot like that. And here we do see a Spellcaller die, Feather get protection so it can play good defense, and kind of interesting for Mark not to attack. Oh no, it had 3 damage on the Feather. So that was a good non-attack.
The Ryle was the other point, right?
Yeah, Phantom would have traded with it there. So
this Feather has recovered from the Cellar Records all by itself. Just completely kept Mark in the game.
Yeah, and now it kind of feels like Collected Company or Bust type range from Nick as a card that can pull him out of this. The Spirits deck, the cards are just a little bit too weak pound for pound, I think, to really keep up with an active Feather.
Yeah.
And if Nick's allowing this God's Willing to go through as well as Ryle, it kind of seems like he doesn't really have any recourse. It seems like another Spell Queller would have been really important. And here we see a land in hand. Nick extends the hands after, I think, a really interesting and compelling set of 3
Yeah,
there.
I enjoyed that one. That was pretty cool. There's a lot of I'm obviously not accustomed to taking into account lords and different, spells jumping around back and forth. That's not something I'm just not decks I'm playing with. So there's definitely a learning curve for something like that, as I would have killed myself multiple different times in that game.
Yeah, we saw a lot of nice little foils from our Feather players. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's invested in this deck and has been playing it for a while. It's one that I know people have been talking about since Pioneer came up as a format. And that's going to bring us to the end of round 6. We'll be back pretty shortly. I think we just hit time here. So, Joe and Matt are going to be back in the booth. Round 7, so we're going to have more kind of matches winning players in the top 8. Hope you don't go anywhere, and we'll be back in just a few moments.